Hello and welcome back to FourFourTwo. My name is Ryan, and can I just say before the video starts, thank you very, very much for all the kind comments on the recent episode. I really do appreciate it, and I do obviously understand there's a big shift happening here at FourFourTwo, but I thought, what other possible way could we get back into this than talking about probably one of the most topical people and football clubs at the moment, the Newcastle United's 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏. What a career he's had. We could even go from now to then because he's had probably one of the best stories of recent football, to be honest. Now, obviously, we all know Newcastle have just won their first trophy in 70 years, which is a quite incredible achievement. I'm sure that the former presenter of this show would have been very, very happy as well. But I've got to say, 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏, the 6'7" absolute giant. Everyone's talked about him as being probably one of the biggest anomalies, tactical anomalies. I see a lot of comments last time wanting some more tactical analysis. 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏 is probably one of those. He is a very different player. Now, I feel like I saw a lot of people talking about his debut for England as being a very, very steady, this is what you expect, old-fashioned centre-back performance. And whilst that might be true, I still believe there's a lot more to 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏 than just being that old-fashioned centre-back, that big man that wins headers. Now, I know that his heading ability has gone through the roof recently with that goal at Wembley to win that trophy for Newcastle. It's incredible. I mean, I'm saying this as a Brighton fan. I used to watch 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏 on headers and I promise you, he never did that for us. And this is the thing with 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏. He is an anomaly. He's a tactical anomaly, but he's also an anomaly in the sense of where he's come from and how he's gone about it. 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏 was one of those people that he wasn't involved in the academy. He wasn't one of the traditional, modern footballers that likes to be coming through the academy. In fact, he was actually rejected by Newcastle just age 11. Throughout that time of being 11 and 16, he played a lot of local stuff, playing across a whole host of teams like Blyth Spartans, like Blyth Town, and, finding his way probably through the grassroots side of the game. And even in his own admission recently, he doesn't actually think he was that good of a player when he was younger. And I find this quite an insane thing to try and process because where he's gone through all of these struggles, he's gone from being this player that's playing part-time at Asda to getting his move to Darlington, playing league football within a few months. And then a couple years later, he's then got his move to a team like Fulham where he can then express himself on the Premier League stage. All of that was about 10 years ago, And to then fast forward that 10 years of back then being rated by his manager at Fulham as not good enough. He's not the progression that the club wanted. They sent him on a couple of loans to Yeovil, to Birmingham. His loan at Yeovil was a really good one for him. He managed to get promoted. To then get back into Fulham, still not be regarded at all as really a player that they wanted to keep around the squad. I spoke to a few Fulham fans who actually thought, he was never really the guy that we saw long term here. He was never the one that we really wanted to keep around the club. He was just a decent player, and that's all that people really said about 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏. You start to think, okay, confidence really comes into it now. And this is one thing that 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏 spoke about a lot, was his mental health and his confidence throughout his career was never truly there. He never really believed that he was the guy to be there. And he felt like a lot of time he was actually playing through fear, through anger, through spite. And luckily he had a chip on his shoulder. He wanted to be proving people wrong and fighting back and, all well and good. A lot of players have that sort of thing. And 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏 was one of those. But at the same time, that's not always the best way to be in football, and in life in general. You don't want to be living through spite. And I think since he's been a bit older, he's now come to accept the fact that, if we lose today, it's okay. And he put a lot of that down to when he finally had his kids and settled down a little bit in his personal life. He's then got his move to Brighton and things were a little bit more stable after his time at Wigan. And you start to think, okay, that confidence starts to shift a little bit for him. Now let's talk about his time at Wigan. His time at Wigan was successful on the most part. It started a bit poor. He had a lot of shouts at the time of being maybe not quite good enough. But again, this is the same sort of recurring scenario of, being written off from the beginning to then being a player that's worth highly regarding at the time. So when he got released by Fulham, it was a bit of a shock. Byrne, in his own admission, said he thought that he was going to have a whole host of clubs waiting to sign him. And, as a player, you'd like to think that that's the way that it's going to go. Unfortunately for him, it really wasn't the case. In fact, he left Fulham and the only real club there for him was Wigan. As I said, he started a bit shaky there, but he became quickly a fan's favourite and even won a few awards like Player of the Season. And from that point, it was a big, big turning point for 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏's lifestyle and career in general. He went from being this very scared and, not confident guy. He wasn't sure on where he wanted to go in football. He's broke into football very late, never truly had that academy experience. And when you've got that whole mixture of, insecurity perhaps in football, it's nice to have that pureness, I think, which he managed to finally get at Wigan. Now, despite getting relegated in 2016-17, Dan Burn actually became player of the season, fans' favourite, and fired them very, very quickly back up the following season. League One football, after only 2 years ago playing in the Premier League, probably is a little bit of a shock. But if you're happy, I think that's when you start to see players truly become themselves. Now, this is where Dan Burn tactically started to come in. The Dan Burn that liked to get forward. Now, Burn, as a Brighton fan memory, as a Wigan fan memory, and I'll shout out Jamie, the Wigan fan, has sent me forward, but he has exactly the same memory of, where the hell is he going? And I think that that's the one thing that Burn manages to get out of every single game that he played for both my club, Wigan, and probably times at Newcastle as well, where you've all thought, what is he doing? He's bombing forward. He's 6'7", get back. But he was technically completely fine in doing so. And with that, he actually added a lot of goals to his game. He scored a few goals at Yeovil and throughout his career in general. But actually at Wigan, if you remember, this is where the cringy dances came in as well. And it was that sort of expression probably that Burn didn't really get to have throughout his career, particularly at the beginning. And okay, maybe it's taken a little bit longer than he perhaps would have wanted to. Getting up to 2015, making your debut within 2 years of being part-time Asda to being a league footballer, it's quite an incredible rise within a short space of time. But actually it's proof that a lot of times these short rises aren't the best thing for players. And Burn was a very big culprit at that. He didn't rate himself. He didn't think he was all that. He always had managers, particularly at Fulham, slamming him back down. And the confidence aspect and mental health of players is probably more important than ever. And if there's one thing that you're ever going to take out of this video from Dan Burn, it's just to never give up. To then make his move to Brighton, who originally weren't known for being this high recruitment club that they are now. At the time of doing this was a bit of a strange one. And in fact, actually, the only reason he was signed, in Dan Burn's own words, is to do with having an extra homegrown player, which does make it sound a little bit bad. Dan Burn, again, as he always is, willing to prove everybody wrong. And Graham Potter really saw that in him. And that's when Potter's tactics really started to suit him. That inverted role and also bombing forward role. We saw a very, very different style to Burn that we ever could have imagined. Dunk and Duffy were pretty much, you couldn't have touched them when he first arrived. So he went back on loan to Wigan. He actually arrived with a broken foot as well. That whole move was difficult for him coming in because he knew that he wasn't going to be a starting player. He knew that realistically he wasn't ever going to be a centre-back here. So that opened up an opportunity at left-back. Burn became very familiar with being on that left side. As I mentioned before, that left foot was a very, very impressive one. He liked to bomb forward. It was very difficult to get near him. He wasn't just physically demanding. He was very, very, very technically gifted with his feet as well. He liked to invert into space, but he liked to go forward too. And it opened up a whole different range of possibilities. And at the time when this was a big thing between playing three at the back and overloading centre-backs, it was very interesting to see Burn take that position of all people. And I think this is what Newcastle fans probably would have seen before he made that big jump. And it was always Dan Burn's massive, massive achievement. He thought, if I can get to play for Newcastle, even just once, then he's made it in his career. And this is at a time where Newcastle had just had their massive takeover. Now, Brighton have always been historically the club that likes to give the opportunity if it arrives. They won't stand in the way of someone that wants to leave. It was difficult. He was in a really good scenario. In fact, it went from being a player that was pretty much not regarded at Brighton, and Brighton fans wanted him sold only a year prior to when he actually did go, to being, we didn't want him to leave. And who would have wanted him to leave at the time? He was absolutely immense and pretty much consolidated himself in that starting lineup. But the interest from Newcastle arrived, £13 million. Who would have thought only a few years before that Dan Burn would even be worth £13 million? And this is where I give absolute credit to someone like him. Hard work, but also the determination, the mental determination. It inspires me before anybody else, but I think that a lot of people feel inspired by the way Dan Burn's done it. It's a way that's different to the traditional way now. I think now you have an academy, you're built up, and that's it. You're on a pathway from the beginning. Burns earned his stripes, and he also had to earn his finger back. If you didn't know already, he only has 4 fingers, which is a crazy little side piece, by the way. When he was only 13 years old, he had a horrific ring incident on a fence, and I probably don't want to say too much more. Anyway, let's get back on track. So Dan Burn gets into the Newcastle side, and from this point, I feel like a lot of, particularly everyone that he's now been at, he's built up a lot of career experience, been under a lot of managers, been under the eyes of a lot of fans. And now there's a lot of eyes on him at Newcastle thinking, okay, they're in a transition era, they're putting a lot of money into the squad, and it's in a time where Newcastle now can compete for trophies and financially compete in the Premier League. Byrne really didn't put himself in that reckoning for this move. He thought that as soon as the takeover was done, that's the opportunity gone. It's not going to happen anymore. Surely they're going to want world-class centre-backs. Well, if you're going to then go into the side, break in like he has done, and really consolidate himself, as I say, over the last 3 years, I feel like he's become the staple figure really for Newcastle at the back, alongside Fabian Schär. Now, when you think of Newcastle, you think of Byrne. And then within the last year, things have changed again. He's played with his boyhood club in the Champions League, won the first trophy in 70 years, and also become somewhat, I would say, of a legend at his boyhood club. Now, if you were to look back all the way back when you look back at Blythe, when you look back at Darlington and you say, the kid that was rejected at age 11, the kid that went through school not really feeling confident enough to play football, the kid that was almost giving up when he was at Fulham because his manager didn't rate him and no one saw a pathway for him, the kid when he was at Brighton and fans pretty much had him written off from the beginning, to the man that leads Newcastle their first ever trophy, to the man that wears his home shirt. It's incredible. The best part about this is, as a person, what you get to see from him, the first words he says, not about how much of an achievement it is for him to wear the England shirt, but just to be out in the experience, singing the national anthem. That's the first thing he says on English media. I think that's really testament to the sort of person he is. And then here in 2024, being the guy that celebrates in sign language when his team scored, I think if that doesn't show the sort of person that he is for a BSL celebration after a Newcastle goal, just so that other fans can feel included, I just think that that's Dan Byrne. And to add on just how much of a personable and great person Dan Byrne was around the camp at Brighton, Joel Veltman's actually messaged us and he said, "Hey Ryan, thank you for your message. I just want to say he was a great lad to have around the dressing room, always supporting the other players, knew what his qualities were and always stayed humble because he knew where he came from." On the same night as the Carabao Cup final, the Geordie boy Sam Fender sung Dan Byrne to one of his songs, and I've got to overlay this because it's perfect. To call Dan Byrne God, by the way, I think when you look back at all of these past comments for Dan Byrne, to then have fast forwarded to 2025 being called God live on stage, it's poetic, it's beautiful, it's Dan Byrne. He's just an absolute icon. So Dan Byrne, this video is for you, my friend, and this is proof to anybody watching this: don't give up. Anyway, thank you all for watching. My name has been Ryan, and I hope you do enjoy the new style videos. As I say, a little bit different. We do try and keep some sort of stuff similar, but of course, let us know in the comments below your thoughts, and we'll see you very, very soon. Like, comment, subscribe, of course, and we'll see you very soon. And goodbye.